Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. Welcome back to all of you after the Diwali break. Hope all of you had a great Diwali and all our Diwali wishes from SRIRAM'S IAS to you. So without further ado, let's start our today's discussion on the important articles which feature in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. And with this, let's take up our first article from the newspaper. The first important article which features in the newspaper reads, "One nation, one police uniform is ideal," says Prime Minister Modi. Now, this particular statement has come through this words of Prime Minister Modi, saying that we should have much on the lines of one nation, one ration card, one nation, one mobility card, or one nation, one sign language. When we can have such uniformity in other laws, he also mooted the idea of having one police uniform for the whole country. Now, this is said because throughout the country, the police uniforms in various states differ in their patterns and their color combinations. So that is why PM Modi mooted this idea and said that this is a suggestion from him to the state governments. Why this was a suggestion to the state governments? We'll just take a look at that in a moment. So he said that it was a suggestion to the state governments and not necessarily that the suggestion gets implemented right away, but it can take 10 to 50 or next 100 years for this suggestion to take place. So why did he give such a suggestion? He said that he envisages the police force system of India in a very modernized sense and a force which comes to the aid of the citizens of the country, and therefore they should have a single uniform throughout the country which represents the police of the country. So based on these lines, the PM has suggested this idea. So from the examination point of view, what becomes important for us is to know how is the police regulated in the country and how valid is this idea for us to consider that every police force of the state should have the same uniform. Now, this suggestion becomes important from the light of that at least the Prime Minister has highlighted the much needed reform sector of India, that is the police system. The police system is in India needs much one can say reforms which are not coming and are in the pipeline for since the last many years, and that is why his suggestion at least gives us an opportunity to throw light on the status of the police system in India. So with that, let's look at the important provisions and aspects that we need to look into regarding this issue. So when we talk about one nation and one police having the single uniform, how can we achieve this? So for that, we need to take a look at how the police system is regulated in India, and what we get is from the Constitution. Constitution actually gives us the framework as to how police and the public order system would be regulated in India. And according to the Constitution, both public order and police are placed in the second list placed under 7th schedule, which is also known as the state list. This means that every state will have their separate police force, and this police force would be regulated by the state governments. This power has been vested with the state under the Constitution. Therefore, when we look at this provisions, prima facie we understand that there can be many problems while implementing one single uniform for one particular police force, because ultimately the deciding jurisdiction with respect to the powers of the police and other aspects of the police system lies ultimately with the state governments. And that is why this particular move that is suggested, he suggested this to the state governments rather than being able to impose it on them, simply because the power with respect to changing these aspects with the police system rests with the state government. So these are the constitutional provisions around this. Now, when we talk about the PM highlighting the important aspect of reforming the police system, what are some of the issues that plague the police system in India? So there are a host of issues which plague the police system in India, and which is why often the common citizens of the country, rather than feeling safe going to a police officer and making their grievance addressed, they actually are scared and fear going to the police, and they even fear that counter harassment would be taken place by the police for them only. So this creates a lot of animosity between the citizenry and the police. And why does this happen? There are a host of issues with respect to the police system in India, and these issues, one can say, are some of them are also on the part of the faults committed by the police, and also some of the issues are there for their no fault of their own, where they themselves are suffering. So both kinds of issues are there. So first kind of issue is that the police in India is still regulated by the colonial legacy of laws, especially the Police Act, which was set up in 1861. This Police Act of 1861 actually came after the revolt of 1857, where the crown took over and they wanted to suppress the revolutionary tendencies of the Indian citizens. And that is why this was where the foundation of was led, where the police of the country was somewhere hostile to its citizenry. This was because of the nature of the colonial legacy that this law has, and this law continues to be in practice and regulate major provisions with respect to the police system in India. So this becomes a major issue, a foundational issue which is hindering the harmonious relationship between the citizenry and the police system. Second is that there is an issue between accountability to the political executives versus operational freedom. This is accounted as a major roadblock when it comes to police governance in India, because whenever a state government has the power over the police system, it is seen that be it center or the state, these police forces are often used by the political executives to further their own objectives, which means that selective arrests are made and other such activities are indulged into by the political executives. And this hampers the autonomy of the police force themselves. And that is why we see that ultimately the police forces are stoop down to nothing but pawns of the political executive. This is what the allegation is always leveled upon onto the political executives and the relationship between the police and political executives. So this becomes a major issue where the police are not able to function to their core competencies simply because they're regulated by the political executives. So this is a major issue which hampers the police governance. Third is the psychological pressure. The police in India work in inhuman conditions, and sometimes they even work more than 20 hours a day. And especially in times of festival where the other citizens of the country enjoy, they are doing the laborious work of maintaining law and order. So oftentimes their conditions are not very good, and which is why it puts a lot of psychological pressure on them. Next is the public perception. All of this, the issues which we are seeing, ultimately what it results into is a hostile police that is looked upon by the citizenry. And the police also, since it's overworked, since it's not working in the right conditions, it is also not able to have a harmonious relationship with the citizenry. So these are the issues. Then another issue is of the overburdened force. Overburdened police force means that for such a high population that India has, there are very less policemen in India to regulate. So where the UN standard is having 222 police per lakh persons, India only has 137 policemen. So this shows the gross inadequacy as well. And not just this, where the police is overburdened, this is also contributed by the high number of vacancies in the police force, where a high percentage of vacancies within the police force exacerbate an existing problem of the overburdened police personnel. So both these problems go hand in hand. Then apart from this, the problem of custodial deaths is also alarming in today's times, where a lot of disproportionate custodial deaths are also reported with the police. So that makes a major mark on the accountability aspect of the police system. The next issue is with respect to the constabulary. Now constabulary, or what we call the police constables, these are the people who are working at the ground level of the police system, and this is where the point of contact between the citizenry and police is the most. And these personnel are some of the, we can say, are most underprivileged and weak personnel, where they do not have much adequate salary. Their working conditions are the most dire. Then that is why they also are not able to have a good relationship with the citizenry. Next is, last but not the least, the infrastructural issues. This need not be, this is very needless to elaborate upon. The police system in India is in dire need for infrastructural upgradation. This is what PM Modi was also speaking in his address when he was addressing the Home Ministers Conclave of the states. And he also pointed out that infrastructure should be enhanced with respect to the police system. So these are some of the existing issues with respect to the police system in India, where yes, it is important to talk on what uniform the police should be wearing, but it is also important that we address these core major issues which surround the police system. And what is the status of reforms that is being done with respect to the police system? Since the time of independence, various reforms commissions and committees have been established to treat and better the police system, but seldom have been these recommendations implemented in real sense. So be that from 1977, there was a National Police Commission which was set up to look into the police reforms. Then after that, various committees such as the Padmanabha Committee, Malimat Committee or Madhava Menon Committee, all of these committees gave their suggestions as to how the police force can be made more sensitive, modernized, can be made more trained with tech savvy, can be made more responsible and accountable, but major provisions among these recommendations are yet to be implemented. Then a major development came in 2006, where in the Prakash Singh versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court intervened and gave certain guidelines which it said that it should be implemented to reform the police system. Those were 7 set of guidelines. What were the guidelines? They were overarching guidelines which were meant for improving the police governance, such as constituting a state security commission, having the tenure of the SP DGP fixed for 2 years, then separation between the investigation and law order functions. Now the police handle a host of functions, be those the investigation functions. So for example, when a crime happens, the unit of the police which investigates the case handles investigation, and then there are separate police functions which are under the law and order functions. So the Supreme Court opined that these 2 types of functions should be separated and separate cadres should be there for these type of services. Then a police establishment board should be set up, and a police complaints authorities at the state and district level should also be set up to again take care of the grievance redressal mechanism. And last is setting up a National Security Commission at the central level, which would take care of the overarching policy needs and central regulation framework that is needed for the police system in India. So these are some of the reforms that are coming from the major committees and reform commissions, as well as the Supreme Court, which we should know about whenever we encounter a question with respect to the mains examination. So this was a discussion on the police system in India and what are some of the issues and the reforms that are needed with respect to reforming the police system. So with this, we finish this article and let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, Panel raises data privacy concerns in the draft telecom law. Now, why is this article appearing in the newspaper? Because in the month of September 2022, the central government brought out the draft Indian Telecommunications Act of 2022. This was supposed to take care and one can say repeal the earlier old versions of the telecom law and bring out a new legislation which would take care of the provisions of the previous laws and also add certain amendments and take it into its fold certain new functions. So this one can say the act was promulgated in the parliament, and it was before the parliament it was kept for public consultation, and when it was kept into the parliament, now the standing committee of the parliament, it has flagged off certain issues in this particular draft law. So what are these issues that the parliamentary committee has highlighted? We'll take a look at that. But before that, let's take a look at the Indian telecom sector and why is there a need to regulate this sector and what is the importance of this sector. So when we talk about the telecom sector of India, whenever we talk about as simple as the telecom services and internet services that we are provided by multiple telecom providers such as Airtel, Idea, Reliance Jio. All these companies which provide us telecom services are known as telecom operators in India, and the services that are offered by these companies are basically the ambit of regulation for the Telecom Act. So this is the act which takes care of the sector, and the telecom sector especially for India is a very important sector because this industry in India is the second largest in the world with a subscriber base of more than 1.17 billion as of 2022. It's very obvious because the population of India is very high. The number of telephone users or smartphone users in India is ever increasing, and that is why the telecom industry in India is very large, as much as second largest in the world. India overall has a tele density of 85.11%, where we can roughly say that close to 80% of the population has an access to the has some kind of a mobile phone. And this telecom sector is the third largest sector in terms of FDI inflows as well. Now, when it comes to the telecom sector in India, it also receives a lot of foreign direct investment. And for the same purpose, Indian government has allowed 100% of FDI into India with automatic route, which means that it has made foreign investment in telecom sector in India very, very easy. And that is why we often see many companies which are of foreign origin, such as the Vodafone. Vodafone is essentially a company based in UK and it is running its services in India, which means that FDI was allowed in India, and that is why Vodafone is working in India. So that is why, and this investment that the companies make in India marks for a major share in India's FDI, where it closely contributes to around 6.44% to India's total FDI inflow. And due to all this, India is on its way to becoming the second largest smartphone market, as well as all the 1 billion installed devices, and is expected to have 920 million unique mobile subscribers by 2025, which includes 88 million 5G connections. This data only goes to show as the potential of telecom industry is only going to rise in the coming future. This is where the importance of this Telecommunication Act comes in, where the mandate of the act should be very clear, that it should have certain provisions which is very remarkably able, one can say, to regulate the telecom sector very efficiently, and at the same time have requisite freedom for the companies to operate in India, and have certain safeguards for the citizens as well as for the companies to keep on operating in India. So this law, this particular act, was, as I said, promulgated in the parliament in month of September, and the parliamentary committee has given out certain concerns with respect to this law. Before we move on to the concerns, let's understand what are some of the major provisions that this particular draft Indian Telecom Act proposes. The first major amendment from the old laws, there are three laws which this particular draft act encompasses in itself. One is the Indian Telegraph Act 1885. This act was quite in news because it is the use of this Indian Telegraph Act 1885 which the government uses to employ internet shutdowns in various regions of the country. So it is through this act that the Indian government takes the power from, and now that power would be given to the government through this Indian Telecom Act. Next is the Indian Wireless Telegraphy Act and the Telegraph Wires Unlawful Possession Act of 1950. The current draft law encompasses these three laws, and the major changes that it has brought out in this draft law is, the first one is that it has diluted the power of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, or what we shortly call as TRAI. Now, TRAI under the previous law was a regulatory body, but this new law has amended this provision and has made the body from a regulatory one to only a recommendatory body. What this means is that the many powers of this regulatory body, where as a regulator of the industry, it had certain powers to levy penalties, make policies, but these powers have now been stripped away and it is only made a recommendatory body. What this simply will mean is that whatever decisions the TRAI takes would not be binding on the higher authorities, and it would only have a recommendatory nature with respect to their guidelines. So this is a serious letdown of the powers of the TRAI. This is also something which the Parliamentary Standing Committee has flagged out in its report. Then the OTT regulation ambit is quite significant in the draft telecom law. What this means is that up until now, under the Telecom Act, only the mobile service providers or the internet service providers were taken into its ambit. But now, certain OTT platforms, or what we commonly know as Netflix, Amazon, other such OTT platforms, which basically started as a content hosting platforms, which basically showed movies and shows, and then later indulged into making and producing their own content. These kind of platforms are known as the over-the-top platforms or OTT platforms. Now, this particular draft Telecom Act is taking the OTT services and the OTT service providers also under its ambit. So the committee has also highlighted that this is also expanding the range of the law, where up until now only the telecom service providers were there, and now one is taking the OTT service providers as well. And with this, the provision says that the draft telecom law will have, under the draft telecom law, the central government will have power for message interception in case of public emergency and national security. What this means is that all the messages that are exchanged between these service providers and the users who use these services, the messages which are exchanged, the central government will have the power to intercept these messages or to read these messages on the grounds of if there's any case of public emergency or case of national security. This is the major highlight that the parliamentary committee has done, where it is said that by using overarching words such as public emergency and national security, one can easily see reading these words that these words are a little difficult to intercept. What might come off as national security and public emergency is very vague, and that is why this kind of vague definitions in the provision lead to arbitrary powers. This is what the committee has said, that wording provisions in such vague words actually gives arbitrary powers to the authorities, which is not a good case, and it will have serious implications on the privacy of the citizens. This is the major concern that has been flagged off by the committee. And next is that the Telecommunication Development Fund has been set up. So it has proposed to rename the Universal Service Obligation Fund as the Telecommunication Development Fund, and the money that would be collected from this fund would directly get lodged in the Consolidated Fund of India. So these are some of the major provisions, and with this we also saw what the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information and Technology has highlighted as its concern. So this was a discussion with respect to this article, and with this we come to the end of today's discussion, and we'll meet again on Monday with the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.